I took my daughter-in-law's broken cell phone to be repaired, but the technician who fixed it pulled me aside and whispered, "Cancel your cards, change your passwords, and run immediately." When I asked him what was wrong, he turned the phone towards me, and what he showed me made my blood run cold. But before we continue, make sure you are already subscribed to the channel and write in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love to know how far our stories are reaching. My name is Emily. I'm 65 years old, and until 3 days ago, I believed I had a perfectly normal life. I live in a comfortable house in Chicago with my husband Richard, who is 67. We recently retired. I was a history teacher and he was an engineer. We have one son, Daniel, who has been married for 5 years to Sarah. Our daughter-in-law always seemed like a charming young woman. She has a degree in administration. She's smart, beautiful, and worked at a financial consulting firm. Daniel met her at a party through mutual friends, and they were married in less than a year. Sometimes I thought she was a bit distant, but I blamed it on work stress and her more reserved personality. It all started last Wednesday when Sarah came to visit us alone. This was unusual since she and Daniel normally came together on weekends. She arrived agitated, saying she had a problem with her phone. The screen was completely shattered, and she asked if I knew a reliable place to repair it. "I accidentally broke my phone, and I need it working by today for a big meeting tomorrow. Daniel is out of town, and I have no idea where to take it," she explained. Coincidentally, I had just taken my own phone for repair last week to a small shop downtown. The owner, David, who everyone calls Dave, was the son of an old colleague from the school where I taught. I offered to take her phone for her. "That would be perfect, Emily. You'd be saving my life," Sarah said, handing me the phone. "The password is 28118, our wedding anniversary. I have to run to the office now. Can I pick it up tonight?" I agreed, of course. I took the phone and drove to Dave's shop. The place was small, wedged between a pharmacy and a bakery with a discreet sign. Express Repairs. When I walked in, Dave was hunched over a table full of tiny tools and disassembled electronics. "Mrs. Anderson, what a pleasure to see you again." He greeted me with a smile. I explained the situation with my daughter-in-law's phone, and he assured me he could fix it in a few hours. "I'll be back after lunch," I said, giving him the device and the password. I spent the afternoon running errands, and around 4:00 p.m. I returned to the shop. Dave was alone, and when he saw me walk in, his face changed. His friendly expression gave way to something I couldn't quite decipher. Worry, fear. "Mrs. Anderson," he said in a low voice, looking quickly towards the door as if checking that no one else was there. "The phone is ready, but I need to show you something, ma'am." I frowned, confused. "Is there a problem with the device?" "Not with the device," he replied, and then he leaned in, speaking in almost a whisper. "Cancel your cards, change your passwords, and run. Immediately." A chill ran down my spine. "What? What are you talking about, Dave?" He motioned for me to come closer, unlocked Sarah's phone, and went into the messaging app. He navigated to a folder called Plan B and showed me the screen. My blood froze. They were messages exchanged between Sarah and my son, detailing a plan to kill me. "Mom is getting more forgetful," said a message from Daniel. "It's the perfect time." "The doctor is already documenting her memory lapses at my request. No one will question it when it happens." Sarah's response turned my stomach. "Her and your father's life insurance is worth almost $2 million. With the sale of the house afterward, we'll have enough to start over far away from Chicago." I felt my legs go weak, and I had to lean on the counter. This can't be true," I murmured more to myself than to Dave. "Mrs. Anderson, I swear I didn't want to snoop. When I was testing the phone after the repair, a notification popped up and I accidentally saw these messages. I couldn't ignore it." I kept scrolling through the conversation, my eyes wide with horror. They discussed methods, dates, how to make it look like a household accident. They talked about medications they could use, doses that would be fatal for a woman my age with high blood pressure. My own son and his wife coldly planning my death. "They're planning to kill Richard too," I whispered, feeling short of breath. The conversation detailed how they would eliminate my husband afterward. "It has to be a few weeks apart," Daniel wrote. "An elderly couple dying at the same time would raise suspicions." Dave closed the shop door and flipped the sign to "Closed." He brought me a glass of water and helped me sit down. "You have to go to the police," he said, his voice firm but gentle. I shook my head, still in shock. "They won't believe me. It's the word of a forgetful old woman against my son and daughter-in-law, respected people in the community." "Then, ma'am, you have to gather evidence and you have to protect yourself." He was right. I took the phone with trembling hands and started taking pictures of the messages with my own device. I documented everything: dates, times, the detailed plan, the mentions of the family doctor who was apparently being manipulated to create a history of dementia. "Dave, could you restore the phone exactly as it was? I don't want them to know we found anything." He agreed, and we worked together for another hour. When he finished, Sarah's phone looked untouched, with no sign that her secret messages had been discovered. When I left the shop, I felt like I was in a nightmare. The gray Chicago sky seemed even bleaker. How could I go home? How could I look at Richard knowing our only son was planning to kill us? Worse, how would I face Sarah when she came to pick up the phone? Driving home, I planned every step. First, I had to alert Richard without scaring him too much. Then we had to act fast, but intelligently. If Daniel and Sarah suspected we knew something, they might speed up their plans or create a new strategy. The weight of the betrayal was almost unbearable. My son, the one I carried, the one I nursed, the one I helped with homework, the one I comforted after his first breakup, was planning my death for money. I parked the car in front of our house and took several deep breaths. I had to stay calm. The game of life and death had begun, and I had to be smarter than the two young people who thought a forgetful old woman would be an easy target. Little did they know this old lady had stared down corporate boards as a student activist, that she had raised a son alone while her husband traveled for work, that she had survived breast cancer 5 years ago. If they thought I was going down without a fight, they were dead wrong. I got out of the car holding Sarah's phone as if it were a bomb about to explode. I walked into the house where my life would never be the same. Richard was in the living room watching the news just like he did every afternoon. His familiar face, with his gray hair and reading glasses on the tip of his nose, gave me a moment of normality in the midst of the chaos that had just entered my life. "Did you get Sarah's phone sorted out?" he asked distractedly, not taking his eyes off the TV. I swallowed hard. "Yes, it's fixed." I had to tell him, but I didn't know how to start. "How do you tell your husband of 40 years that your only child wants you both dead?" "Richard!" I called out, my voice firmer than I expected. "I need to show you something. It's serious." Something in my tone must have alarmed him, because he immediately turned off the television and looked at me intently. "What happened, Emily?" I sat down next to him and showed him the photos I had taken of the messages. I watched his face as he read. The initial confusion followed by disbelief, then horror, and finally a pain so deep I thought he would collapse right there. "No," he whispered, his voice choked. "There must be some mistake. Daniel would never—" "I didn't want to believe it either," I replied, holding his trembling hands. "But it's them, Richard. It's Daniel's number, it's the way he writes, and Sarah responding from her phone, which is right here with me." Richard closed his eyes, taking several deep breaths. When he opened them again, I saw something I rarely witnessed: absolute determination. "What are we going to do?" he asked. I explained my initial plan. Document everything. Check our bank accounts, change passwords, cancel shared cards, and investigate which doctor was involved in this. We had to act as if nothing had changed while secretly gathering enough evidence to confront them, or if necessary, take it all to the police. "Sarah is coming to pick up the phone tonight," I warned. "We have to act normal." "How?" Richard's voice cracked. "How am I supposed to look at her knowing that—" "The same way I taught teenagers to feign interest in medieval history for 30 years. I tried to joke, but the smile was weak. "One step at a time, Richard. Our life depends on this." We spent the next hour checking our online bank accounts. We discovered something disturbing. Small sums had been regularly transferred from our joint account to an unknown account over the last 3 months, amounts low enough not to raise suspicion. $200 here, $300 there, but they added up to almost $10,000. "Daniel has access to our accounts," Richard murmured. "We gave him power of attorney last year, remember, just in case anything happened to us." The irony was bitter. We trusted him so much that we practically handed him the tools for our own destruction. We changed all the passwords. We canceled 2 credit cards that Daniel had as an additional user, and we called the bank requesting a block on any transaction over $1,000 without in-person authorization. "And what about the doctor?" Richard asked. "Dr. Paul, he's been our doctor for over 15 years. He was a friend. He occasionally had lunch at our house." The idea that he could be falsifying medical records at my son's request was almost as painful as Daniel's betrayal. "I'm going to schedule an appointment for tomorrow," I decided. "Alone. I want to see what he says about my memory." At 7 p.m., the doorbell rang. Richard and I looked at each other tense. He squeezed my hand, a silent promise that we would stick to our plan. I opened the door, forcing a smile. Sarah looked beautiful as always, with her brown hair impeccably styled and elegant clothes. That polished appearance now seemed like a perfect mask to hide the monstrosity underneath. "Emily, sorry to come by so late. How did it go with the technician?" "Everything's fine," I replied, handing her the phone. "Dave did a great job. The screen is good as new." She turned on the device, checked it quickly, and smiled. "Perfect. How much was it? Let me pay you." "Don't worry about it. I already took care of it. It was a courtesy he didn't even charge me since I'm an old customer." Sarah hesitated for a moment, a slight frown I wouldn't have noticed before. Was she worried the technician had seen something? "Are you sure I don't want to impose?" "Not at all, dear. Do you want to come in? Richard is watching TV. We were about to have some tea." "Oh, I can't today. I have an early presentation tomorrow and I still need to review some data." I noticed how she avoided making direct eye contact while she spoke. A skilled liar, but now that I knew what to look for, the small signs were there. "I understand. When does Daniel get back from his trip?" "Tomorrow night," she answered quickly. Another lie. According to the messages, Daniel wasn't on a trip. He was at home waiting for news from her. "Tell him to visit us soon," I said, keeping my tone casual. "It's been almost 2 weeks since we've seen him." "Of course," she smiled, putting the phone in her purse. "He misses you too." "Oh, I just remembered. Did you ever check out that doctor Daniel recommended, the memory specialist?" My heart sped up, but I kept my expression neutral. "We haven't had time yet." "Why, it's just—" She hesitated, her face a mask of fake concern. "Daniel mentioned you've been forgetting some important things lately. Names, appointments." "That's just his impression," I replied with a light laugh. "My memory is excellent. I even remember the day you wore that exact same outfit to my cousin Elisa's birthday party 2 months ago." I saw something flash in her eyes, frustration, worry, before her social smile returned. "Well, anyway, it never hurts to get a checkup right, at your age." Of course. I'll schedule an appointment soon." We said goodbye, and as soon as I closed the door, I leaned against it, exhausted from the effort of pretending. Richard was waiting for me in the living room, tense. "Well, she tried to plant the idea of my memory loss," I replied, sitting next to him. "They're setting the stage for when it happens." "What do we do now?" "We act," I replied, a new determination growing inside me. "First thing tomorrow, I'm going to Dr. Paul. After that, I want to check our life insurance. We need to know exactly what Daniel tampered with, and then we're going to set our own trap." That night, I barely slept. Every noise in the house sounded like a threat. I got up 3 times to check if the doors were locked. One of those times I found Richard in the kitchen drinking water with the same tormented look I must have had. "I'm thinking about Daniel as a little boy," he said quietly. "Remember how he was afraid of the dark, how he'd run to our bed during thunderstorms? What happened to that boy, Emily?" I had no answer. How had our loving son transformed into this calculating stranger capable of coldly planning our deaths? "We're going to find out," I promised, hugging him, "and we are going to survive this." The next morning, I called Dr. Paul's office claiming an emergency. I managed to get an appointment for 10:30 a.m. Before leaving, we checked all our online accounts again and discovered something even more disturbing. There was a new life insurance policy in my name taken out 3 months ago, which I knew nothing about. "How is that possible?" I asked, horrified. Richard navigated through the digital documents. "Look at the signature. It's yours." I leaned closer to the screen, incredulous. The signature really did look like mine, but I had never signed that document. "They forged my signature," I murmured. "And there's more. Look at the value, $1.5 million. And the sole beneficiary is Daniel." Richard completed, his voice breaking. The reality of the situation finally hit me with full force. This wasn't just a vague plan. They had already taken concrete steps. Documents were forged, money was being siphoned, a doctor was possibly involved, and now a life insurance policy I knew nothing about, ready to be collected after my accidental death. I left the house, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. The appointment with Dr. Paul would be crucial. I needed to find out just how involved he was in this conspiracy. The office was quiet at that time of morning. The receptionist, who had known me for years, smiled when she saw me. "Mrs. Anderson, so good to see you. The doctor will be right with you." Less than 10 minutes later, I was called in. Dr. Paul, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a generally friendly expression, seemed slightly uncomfortable when I entered. "Emily, what a surprise. Daniel called me yesterday, said you were reluctant to get tested." "Jason." I kept my expression neutral as I sat down. "Really? That's strange for him to say. Actually, doctor, I came because I am worried about my memory." The doctor nodded as if confirming something he already knew. "Yes, Daniel mentioned some concerning episodes. Forgetfulness, confusion." "Curious?" I replied calmly, "because I don't remember having any problems like that." Dr. Paul hesitated for a moment. "Well, Emily, sometimes the patient doesn't perceive their own lapses. It's common in the early stages of dementia, and you already have a diagnosis apparently." He looked increasingly uncomfortable. "No, of course not. But Daniel showed me some videos. You confusing dates, forgetting the names of close relatives." "Videos?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "Can I see them?" "He didn't leave me copies, but—" "Dr. Paul," I interrupted, leaning forward. "I have been your patient for 15 years. You know me. Do you really think I have dementia, or are you just believing what my son says?" The silence that followed was revealing. Finally, he sighed. "Emily, Daniel came to see me several times in recent months, very concerned. He said you and Richard were losing the ability to care for yourselves, that you needed supervision. He asked me to document any sign of cognitive decline, and you agreed." He had the decency to look ashamed. "I only noted what he reported. I didn't diagnose anything without exams." I stared at him, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "Dr. Paul, my son, is planning to kill me. Me and Richard." The shock on his face seemed genuine. "What, Emily? That's a very serious accusation." "I have proof, and now I understand why he needed your involvement, even if it was indirect. A medical history documenting cognitive decline would make my death much less suspicious." Dr. Paul turned visibly pale. His hands, normally steady, trembled slightly as he adjusted his glasses. "Emily, I would never participate in something like that. I thought Daniel was genuinely worried about you." I took my phone out of my purse and showed him some of the pictures I had taken of the messages. As he read, his face went from disbelief to horror. "My God," he finally murmured. "I had no idea." "I want to see my medical file," I demanded. "Now!" He hesitated only a moment before accessing his computer and opening my file. He turned the screen so I could read. There it was, documented in impersonal clinical language. "Patient shows signs of cognitive decline as reported by son. Recurring episodes of confusion, temporal and spatial disorientation, forgetting names and recent events. Recommend full neurological evaluation." "This is a lie," I said firmly, "and you know it." Emily, I only recorded what Daniel reported. I didn't confirm or diagnose anything. But you created a record that could be used against me. An official medical record suggesting I'm losing my mental faculties, perfect for when I died accidentally, don't you think? The doctor looked truly disturbed. What do you want me to do? First, print this file for me with your signature. Then I want you to make a new entry dated today stating that you evaluated me personally and found no signs of cognitive impairment. He agreed immediately, clearly shaken. And doctor, I added as he typed, if anything happens to me or Richard, this file and our conversation today will be the first things the police see. I left the office with the documents in hand. Concrete proof of the conspiracy against us. Dr. Paul had been manipulated by Daniel, but his complicity, even if born of naivete, had almost cost us our lives. I drove to the bank next. I needed to personally verify our accounts and, most importantly, revoke any power of attorney we had given Daniel. The manager, Mr. Morris, who had handled our accounts for years, was visibly surprised when I asked to revoke the power of attorney. Mrs. Anderson, are you sure your son was in recently saying you and your husband wanted to expand his powers to manage your finances since Mr. Anderson isn't in good health? Another lie. Richard was perfectly healthy for 67. My husband is fine, Mr. Morris, and yes, I am absolutely sure. In fact, I want to verify all movements on our accounts for the last 6 months. We spent the next hour reviewing statements. Besides the small transfers we had already identified online, we discovered something even more disturbing. Daniel had started the process to get a second credit card in Richard's name, claiming the original was lost. He said Mr. Anderson had lost the card, but he didn't want to bother him with the bureaucracy. The manager explained, clearly embarrassed now. And you issued a new card without the cardholder's presence or signature? I asked, incredulous. Mr. Morris squirmed in his chair. Well, since he had power of attorney and already handled several financial matters for you. I took a deep breath containing my rage. Cancel that card immediately and block any future attempts to issue cards without our physical presence. When I left the bank, I felt simultaneously relieved to have stopped another part of the plan and terrified by the extent of the plot. Daniel had meticulously prepared the groundwork, creating a scenario where our deaths would seem natural and he would have total control of our assets. On the way home, my cell phone rang. It was him. My heart pounded, but I answered with the most normal voice possible. Hello, son. Mom, is everything okay? I just got back from my trip, and Sarah told me you took her phone to be repaired. That was very kind of you. The naturalness with which he lied was stunning. There was no trip. You're welcome, dear. The guy at the shop is the son of an old colleague. He gave us a good price. That's great. Hey, I was thinking of stopping by tonight with Sarah. It's been a while since we all had dinner together, right? A chill ran down my spine. Why the sudden interest in visiting? Had they noticed something? Had the doctor called Daniel after my visit? Of course, I replied, keeping my voice steady. Come on over. I'll make that lasagna you love. Perfect. Oh, and Mom, did you go to that doctor I recommended? Sarah said you hadn't gone yet? Actually, I went to see Dr. Paul this morning. A brief silence. You did? And what did he say? Nothing much. He did some simple tests, said I'm perfectly fine for my age. Another silence longer this time. Oh, well that's great then, but maybe it's good to get a second opinion. You know, sometimes Dr. Paul is very conservative with his diagnoses. We'll see, son. So we'll see you tonight? Yeah, around 700. See you later. When I hung up, my hands were shaking. The seemingly innocent conversation was loaded with threatening subtext. Daniel clearly expected Dr. Paul to have declared me cognitively impaired and was thrown off when he found out that wasn't the case. And now he wanted to have dinner with us tonight. Why? To observe my behavior. To check if I showed any suspicion. Or something worse, I got home and found Richard in the living room surrounded by paperwork. He looked up anxious. How did it go? Is the doctor involved? I explained everything. How Daniel had manipulated Dr. Paul to create a false medical history. How he gained access to our bank accounts. how he forged the life insurance documents. And he just called me, I concluded. He and Sarah want to have dinner here tonight. Richard paled. Do you think they suspect we found out? I'm not sure, but he was clearly disturbed when I said I went to doctor. Paul and the doctor found nothing wrong with me. We looked at each other, the same silent question hanging between us. What would Daniel and Sarah try during this dinner? We can't eat or drink anything they bring, Richard said finally, and one of us must always be watching what they're doing. I agreed. We need to record this dinner somehow. If they say anything incriminating... Richard nodded and went to find his old digital recorder, which he used for meetings when he was still working. We tested the device, checking if it still worked and figuring out where we could hide it in the dining room. I spent the afternoon making the lasagna I promised, even though the thought of sitting at a table with two people who were planning to kill us made me feel physically ill. Every time I thought about the messages about the calculating coldness with which our own son discussed our deaths, I felt a pain no words could describe. How did we get to this point? I asked Richard as we set the table. Where did we go wrong with him? Richard shook his head, his eyes showing the same pain I felt. I don't know, Emily. I thought we knew our son. At 7:00 p.m. on the dot, the doorbell rang. Richard and I exchanged one last confirming glance. The recorder was hidden under the table running. Our strategy was simple act. Natural watch their every move and, if possible, provoke a slip-up we could document. I opened the door with a practiced smile. Daniel and Sarah were there, he holding a bottle of red wine and she a box of chocolates she knew were my favorite. "Mom!" Daniel exclaimed, hugging me enthusiastically. The physical contact which once brought me comfort now made my skin crawl. How could he hug me knowing he planned to kill me? "So good to see you," he continued, handing me the bottle. "We brought a special wine for tonight." "Oh, thank you, dear," I replied discreetly, analyzing the label. It was an expensive vintage one that would normally impress me. Now it just made me wonder if it was tainted. Richard greeted them in the living room, his smile as forced as mine. I offered them water, coffee, or juice, anything but the wine they brought. "Not yet, Mom," Daniel said, getting comfortable on the sofa. "Let's save the wine for dinner." We talked about trivial things for almost half an hour. Their jobs, the weather, local news. The surreal normality of the situation was nauseating. I watched how Daniel occasionally exchanged glances with Sarah, how she was attentive to my every move, how he directed seemingly innocent questions about my routine, my medications, my recent difficulties. "So, Mom," he finally said, leaning forward, "how exactly was the appointment with Dr. Paul today? Did he do tests? Order any specific scans?" I kept my expression neutral. "It was a normal checkup. He didn't see anything worrying." "Strange," Daniel muttered, frowning. He had told me he suspected something more serious, maybe early-onset Alzheimer's. "Really?" I asked, raising my eyebrows in false surprise. "When did he tell you that—" Daniel realized his mistake. "Oh, last week, when I called him to talk about those episodes I noticed." "What episodes would those be, son? I don't remember having any problems." A condescending smile appeared on his face. "See, that's exactly what worries us. You don't remember. Last week you forgot Mrs. Simmons' name, our neighbor of 20 years. Then you left the stove on for hours." None of that had happened. They were lies fabricated to build the narrative of my supposed dementia. "Curious," I replied calmly. "I spoke with Mrs. Simmons just yesterday, calling her by name, and I haven't used the stove in days. I've been preferring the microwave lately." Daniel's smile wavered for an instant. "Shall we eat?" Richard intervened, standing up. "Emily's lasagna smells wonderful." At the table, the theater continued. I served the lasagna while Richard discreetly swapped the wine glasses. We had agreed. We would not drink the wine they brought. We would pretend to pour it for ourselves, but we would actually drink from another bottle we had already opened in the kitchen. "A toast," Daniel proposed, raising his glass. "To family and to health." We raised our glasses and pretended to drink. I watched closely as Daniel and Sarah took their own sips. They drank normally without hesitation. Maybe the wine wasn't tainted after all. "Emily," Sarah said, putting her glass down. "Daniel and I have been talking. We're worried about you two living alone in this big house." It's true, Daniel added, especially considering these recent episodes. We thought maybe it would be better if you moved somewhere smaller, easier to maintain, or maybe we could come live here with you for a while. I felt Richard tense up beside me. This was it. They wanted to move into our house to be closer to execute their plan. How thoughtful of you, I replied, keeping my voice steady. But we're perfectly fine, aren't we, Richard? Absolutely, he agreed. In fact, we're even thinking of traveling soon. Maybe a season on the coast in Cancun. I saw Daniel and Sarah exchange a quick glance. Traveling now? Daniel questioned. I don't think that's a good idea, Dad. What about Mom's doctors and your routine checkups? Everything is excellent, Richard replied. We can travel without any worries. Sarah smiled, but her eyes remained cold. Do you need help planning that trip? I can look up hotels, packages. That won't be necessary, I cut in. We've already taken care of everything. The dinner continued with this underlying tension. In every seemingly innocent question, I recognized the real intention behind it. They were evaluating our mental state, trying to establish control, looking for ways to get physically closer to us. When I served dessert a flan I had carefully made in front of Richard, Daniel brought up the subject again. I was talking to a lawyer, he said casually, about a broader power of attorney, for emergencies. What kind of emergencies? Richard asked, his voice controlled. Well, if one of you needs to be hospitalized or if, things get worse with Mom's memory. The lawyer suggested a full power of attorney that would give me authority to make medical and financial decisions for you. I looked at my son, studying his face. That same face I kissed as a baby, comforted as a child, photographed with pride at his graduation. How had it transformed into the mask of a calculating stranger? That won't be necessary, son, I said finally. We already updated all our documents recently. We even made some changes to our will and the insurance beneficiaries. Daniel's expression froze for an instant. Changes? What kind of changes? Nothing major. Just making sure everything is in order in case something happens to us. Sarah put her hand on Daniel's arm as if restraining him. It's always good to review those documents, she said smoothly. Did you consult a lawyer? Mr. Morris, the one you recommended? Richard lied with impressive naturalness. He was very helpful. There was no Mr. Morris the lawyer, but the lie hit its mark. They both seemed momentarily destabilized. At 10:00 p.m., Daniel looked at his watch and announced they had to leave. Work early tomorrow, he justified, but I knew the real reason. They needed to recalculate their plans. After many fake hugs and empty promises to visit more often, they finally left. As soon as the door closed, Richard and I collapsed onto the sofa, physically exhausted from the effort of keeping up appearances. They're suspicious, Richard whispered. Did they realize something has changed? I agreed, getting up to retrieve the recorder. We rewound the tape, listening to the whole conversation again. The implications were clear. Daniel and Sarah were still determined to go through with their plan, but our recent moves, the doctor's visit the bank changes the mention of the will, had made them cautious. They're going to try something soon, Richard said. They can't wait much longer now that we've started taking protective measures. We need more concrete proof, I said. The recording helps, but it's still not enough for the police. What if we tried to get them to confess, confronted them directly? I shook my head. Too risky. They'd deny everything and become more vigilant. That night we checked all the locks 3 times before going to bed. Even so, I slept with the phone next to the bed and a chair wedged against the bedroom door. Precautions I never imagined I'd have to take against my own son. The next morning, I woke with a start to the sound of a car parking. I ran to the window and saw Sarah getting out of her black SUV, alone, at 8:00 a.m. on a weekday when she should have been at work. Richard, I called urgently. Sarah is here. He got up quickly, still drowsy. Alone. Where's Daniel? I don't know. I'm going to open the door, but stay close. I went downstairs, trying to control my breathing. Why would Sarah come so early unannounced? What did she want? I opened the door before she even knocked. Her face registered surprise for a moment, quickly replaced by a practiced smile. Emily, sorry to come so early. I was on my way to work and thought I'd drop off these documents Daniel set aside for you. She was holding a yellow folder. What documents? I asked, not moving to take it. About that power of attorney we talked about yesterday, and some articles about treatments for early-onset Alzheimer's that can help slow the disease's progress. She extended the folder again. Daniel is really worried about you. I looked at the folder for a long moment. It was a trap. It had to be. Maybe documents already prepared with my forged signature, like the life insurance we discovered. Why don't you come in? I invited, keeping my tone casual. We can have some coffee and review it together. Sarah visibly hesitated. Actually, I'm late for work. I just wanted to leave this for you to read calmly. I insist, I said, opening the door wider. Richard just made fresh coffee. It will only take 5 minutes. Reluctantly, she entered. I led her to the kitchen where Richard already was pretending to be calm while sipping his coffee. Sarah, what a pleasant surprise, he said. She brought some documents for us to sign. I explained, emphasizing the word sign. Richard understood immediately. How nice, he replied. Let's take a look. Sarah looked increasingly uncomfortable as Richard took the folder and began to examine the documents. I watched her closely, noticing how her eyes followed his every move, how her fingers drummed nervously on the table. Interesting, Richard murmured after a few minutes. This power of attorney would give Daniel complete control over our finances and medical decisions. It would practically make us legally incompetent. It's just a precaution, Sarah justified quickly. Considering Emily's condition. What condition would that be exactly? I asked directly. Well, the memory lapses, the confusion. She hesitated, apparently realizing she was on dangerous ground. Daniel noticed several episodes. Curious, I commented. Dr. Paul found nothing of the sort yesterday. Doctors can be wrong, she retorted, regaining her composure. That's why a second opinion with a specialist is so important. Richard put the documents back in the folder and pushed it toward Sarah. We appreciate the concern, but we won't be signing this. In fact, we've already started the process to revoke the limited power of attorney we gave Daniel last year. The shock on her face was genuine and momentary, quickly replaced by an expression of studied concern. But why Daniel just wants to help? We're sure he does, I replied. But we prefer to maintain control of our own lives. Sarah stood up abruptly. I have to go. I'm really late. Of course, I said, walking her to the door. Tell Daniel we'll call later to talk about these documents. As soon as she left, Richard and I looked at each other, the same conclusion obvious to both of us. They're speeding up the plan, he whispered. Yes, I nodded. And that means we have to act now. After Sarah left, Richard and I carefully examined the documents she had brought. As we suspected, the power of attorney would give Daniel absolute power over our finances, property, and medical decisions. There was also a voluntary admission form for a nursing home. In reality, an institution for seniors with severe dementia, with spaces for our signatures. They're not even trying to hide it anymore. Richard murmured, his fingers trembling as he looked through the papers. They're practically asking us to sign our own death warrant. That's good, I replied, surprising him. The more explicit they are, the more proof we have. I spent the morning photographing every document, creating digital copies that I sent to the email of Stella, my longtime friend and the only person outside our home I trusted completely. I briefly explained the situation and asked her to keep the files safe without telling anyone. What do we do now? Richard asked when I finished. We need a plan. They're clearly moving forward. Sarah's surprise visit, these documents. We can't wait any longer. We decided it was time to seek professional help. Not the police, we still didn't have enough definitive proof. But a lawyer who could guide us on how to legally protect our assets and, more importantly, our lives. We chose a lawyer we didn't know previously and who had no connection to Daniel. Lucy Mendez, a specialist in family and criminal law. We managed to get an appointment for that same afternoon. In her elegant office downtown, we explained the entire situation to Miss Mendez. The discovered messages, the bank accounts, the fraudulent life insurance, the manipulated medical records, the documents Sarah had brought that morning. The lawyer listened to us attentively, taking occasional notes and asking for specific details. When we finished, she took a deep breath before speaking. "Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, this is an extremely serious situation. What you have described constitutes several crimes: conspiracy, document forgery, attempted fraud, and most seriously, conspiracy to commit murder." "Do we have enough evidence for the police?" Richard asked. "The messages are the strongest evidence, but since you obtained them by accessing Sarah's phone without her authorization, there's a risk they could be considered inadmissible evidence. However, given the gravity of the situation and the imminent danger to you, I believe we can build a solid case." "What should we do first?" I asked. "Immediately, we are going to prepare legal documents, revoking all existing powers of attorney and blocking the possibility of new ones without the presence of an independent lawyer. I myself can serve as a witness to your mental capacity. Then we are going to file a detailed complaint presenting all the evidence we have so far." We spent the next 2 hours signing documents, formalizing statements, and planning every step. Ms. Mendez was thorough, ensuring every legal aspect was covered. "Now," she said finally, "we come to the most urgent issue, your physical safety. I strongly suggest you do not go home today." Richard and I exchanged alarmed glances. "Do you think we're in immediate danger?" I asked, although I already knew the answer. "Based on what you've told me, yes. They've realized you're taking protective measures. Sarah's surprise visit this morning suggests urgency on their part. If I were you, I would spend a few days in a hotel using a different name until we can get a restraining order." We left the lawyer's office with a folder full of documents and a sense of urgency. We went directly to the police station, where we filed a detailed report. The commissioner on duty, a middle-aged man named Roy Miller, listened to our story with growing concern. "This is extremely serious," he commented after examining the evidence. "I'm assigning an investigator to the case immediately and requesting discreet surveillance for your residence." When we mentioned the lawyer's suggestion not to return home, the commissioner emphatically agreed. "In fact, it would be safer for you to stay elsewhere for now. But first I'd like to send a team to install discrete cameras in your house. With your consent, of course. If they try to enter or do anything, we'll have concrete proof." We agreed to the plan. We would return home briefly just to grab some essential belongings while the police installed surveillance equipment in strategic spots. Then we would go to a hotel downtown, far from our neighborhood, using false names as suggested. On the way back, Richard was silent, looking out the taxi window. When we were almost there, he finally spoke. "I never imagined the day would come when I'd be afraid of my own son." I squeezed his hand. There were no words that could ease that pain. Our house, seen from the outside, looked strangely normal. The same windows, the same garden we had cultivated for years, the same mailbox Daniel had painted as a teenager. It was hard to believe that this place, which represented safety and family, had become the scene of a conspiracy against our lives. The plainclothes policemen arrived discreetly in an unmarked car. They entered through the back door and worked quickly, installing tiny cameras in strategic locations. The living room, kitchen, hallways, entrances. They explained the images would be transmitted directly to the station and monitored 24 hours a day. Meanwhile, Richard and I gathered our essentials: clothes for a few days, medications, important documents. I avoided looking at the family photos on the wall, the objects that told the story of our life together. Every memory was now tainted by betrayal. "We're all set," announced the officer in charge of the installation. "The cameras are practically invisible to the naked eye, but they capture everything in high definition. If anyone enters, we'll know." He handed us a small card with a phone number. "This is a direct line to our team. Any emergency, call immediately." As we were about to leave, my cell phone rang. It was Daniel. I looked at the officer, who nodded, indicating I should answer normally. "Hello," I answered, trying to sound natural. "Mom, where are you? I stopped by your house and no one answered." My heart pounded. He had gone to our house while we were out. "Why, we're shopping at the mall." I lied. We needed a few things. Oh, I see. I was just worried. You never leave without saying. The falseness in his voice made me sick. It was a last-minute decision. We're heading home now. Perfect, because I have a surprise for you. I'm waiting for you here. I froze. He was at our house right at that moment. A surprise? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Yeah, I brought that wine you like. I thought we'd spend the afternoon together talking about those documents Sarah left this morning. The officer signaled for me to keep him on the line. How nice, son. We'll be there in about half an hour. Perfect, I'll be waiting. When I hung up, the officer was already communicating with his colleagues. Suspect is at the location. Repeat, suspect is at the location. Maintain distance, but be prepared. Turning to us, he explained, We're going to let him enter. Observe what he does. If he tries to plant anything, drugs poison anything, we'll have it on video. It would be irrefutable proof. The plan made sense, but the thought of Daniel wandering through our house, possibly setting a trap, terrified me. What if he discovers the cameras? Richard asked. Highly unlikely. They're the size of a button and placed in strategic locations. Besides, we have agents positioned discreetly on the block. We went to a nearby cafe where we waited anxiously for news. With every minute that passed, I imagined what Daniel was doing in our house. Setting a trap, planting evidence against us, rummaging through our belongings. After 40 minutes that felt like an eternity, the officer received a call. He listened intently, nodding. He left, he reported, hanging up. And we have something interesting on the recordings. We hurried back to the station where we were taken to a room with several monitors. Commissioner Miller was already there watching the recording from the cameras in our house. Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, he greeted us gravely. I think you should see this. On the screen, we saw Daniel entering the kitchen with 2 plastic bags. He looked around, checked that he was alone, and then began to act methodically. He took several medicine bottles from the bags and put them in our medicine cabinet, mixing them with our own. Then he opened a bottle of wine, probably the surprise he mentioned, and added some kind of white powder, stirring carefully before putting the cork back in. Finally, he took a small electronic device from his pocket and installed it discreetly under the kitchen table, probably a microphone or camera. Oh my God, I murmured, my hands covering my mouth, seeing my own son on video deliberately preparing what looked like our deaths. It was an indescribable pain. Now we have more than enough proof, the commissioner said. I'm issuing arrest warrants for Daniel Anderson and Sarah Anderson immediately. What? What did he put in our medicine cabinet? Richard asked, his voice trembling. We need to analyze it, but from the looks of it, they are controlled substances, possibly in high doses. The substance he added to the wine will also be analyzed, but I'd bet on some kind of potent sedative. The commissioner put his hand on my shoulder. Mrs. Anderson, I know this is extremely painful, but I need you to understand. Your son was actively trying to kill you today. If you had gone home and drunk that wine, and I couldn't hold back the tears. The reality of the situation finally hit me with full force. It wasn't just text messages or suspicious documents. It was my son in our kitchen, deliberately poisoning drinks and medications he knew we would use. What happens now? Richard asked, holding me as I cried. We are going to arrest them today, the commissioner replied. With this evidence, there's no chance of bail. You are safe now, but I still recommend you stay in the hotel for a few days until we sort everything out. As we were leaving the station trying to process everything that had happened, a police officer hurried over. Commissioner Miller, we just received a call. Daniel and Sarah Anderson are at Mr. and Mrs. Anderson's house right now. They seem agitated. They're looking for them. The commissioner reacted immediately. Tactical team, get ready. We're moving now. Turning to us, he explained. They probably realized something is wrong, that you didn't come home as promised. We're going to arrest them right now. Can we go with you? I asked, surprising myself. A part of me wanted to run to never see Daniel or Sarah again. But another part, perhaps the stronger part, needed to be there to witness the end of this nightmare. The commissioner hesitated, but finally agreed. You can stay in the police car at a safe distance, but you will not interfere in any way. On the way to our house, my heart beating uncontrollably in my chest, I wondered how I had gotten to this point, how my son, whom I held in my arms as a baby, had transformed into this stranger, capable of coldly planning my death. When we arrived, several police cars were already positioned discreetly around our house. On the radio, we heard that Daniel and Sarah were still inside, apparently arguing about what to do. "They realize something is wrong," an officer commented. "They're trying to call Mr. and Mrs. Anderson's cell phones repeatedly. And in fact, my phone had rung several times in the last few minutes. Always Daniel." I ignored every call following police instructions. Commissioner Miller was personally coordinating the operation, speaking quietly into the radio with the various agents in position. "Teams in position," he finally announced. "We're moving in 1 minute." It was then that we saw movement. The front door opened, and Daniel came out hurriedly, followed by Sarah. Both were carrying backpacks and looked agitated, looking nervously around as they headed to the car parked at the curb. "They're trying to run," Richard murmured. In an instant, several officers emerged from their hiding places, surrounding the couple with weapons drawn. "Police, stop hands where we can see them." I saw the shock on Daniel's face, the panic in Sarah's eyes. For a moment, Daniel seemed to consider running, but he quickly realized he was surrounded. Slowly, they both raised their hands. In seconds, they were subdued, handcuffed, and put into separate vehicles. It was all so fast and organized it seemed unreal, like a movie scene. Commissioner Miller approached our car. "It's done. Both are in custody, charged with attempted murder conspiracy and various other crimes. We found the tainted wine and the medications he planted. We're going to analyze everything." I looked out the police car window and saw my son being taken away in handcuffs in the back seat of a patrol car. Our eyes met for a brief moment. I saw no remorse in his eyes, just anger and perhaps surprise at being caught. In that moment, a strange feeling washed over me. It wasn't relief, it wasn't satisfied revenge. It was just a deep emptiness, as if something fundamental had been ripped out of me. We returned to the station, where we gave more formal statements. The police had found several incriminating items in Daniel and Sarah's backpacks. The original medications from the bottles he had planted in our house, more doses of the powder he put in the wine plane tickets abroad dated for the next day, and a considerable amount of cash. "They were ready to flee," the commissioner explained. "They probably realized something was wrong, that you didn't come home as promised. The plan was clearly to leave the poisoned wine, wait for you to consume it, and flee before the bodies were found." Richard held my hand tightly as we listened. Every new detail was like a knife twisting in my heart. "You can see them if you want," the commissioner offered after the paperwork was done. "They're in separate cells awaiting transfer." Richard shook his head. He wasn't ready, and I respected that. But something inside me needed to look my son in the eyes one last time. "I want to see Daniel," I said, surprising everyone, including myself. The commissioner led me down a long, cold hallway to a small room with a table and 2 chairs. "We'll bring him here. We'll be watching through the glass, and if you feel any discomfort, just raise your hand and we'll stop it immediately." I nodded, sitting up straight, my hands crossed on the table to hide their shaking. A few minutes later, the door opened and Daniel entered, handcuffed and escorted by an officer. His face was pale, his eyes red, his hair disheveled. He looked like he had aged 10 years in a few hours. The officer made him sit across from me and left standing just outside the door. For almost a minute, we sat in silence, just looking at each other. Daniel was the first to speak. "You set me up," he said, his voice low and bitter. "This is all a big misunderstanding." "Don't lie to me," I replied calmly. "Not now. It's over, Daniel." He looked away, his jaw tight. "What do you want me to say?" "I want to know why. Why your own father and me? What did we do to deserve this?" Daniel let out a humorless laugh. "You wouldn't understand. Try to explain it to me. I have all the time in the world now." He looked at me again, something cold and calculating in his eyes that I had never noticed before. "Money, Mom. It was always about the money. You two have so much. The house, the pensions, the investments, the insurance. And what do you do with it all? Nothing. Living your mediocre little lives, saving every penny, as if you were going to live forever." I felt the sting of his words, but I maintained my composure. And that justifies killing us. It was Sarah's idea at first, he admitted, as if that absolved him somehow. She works in finance. She realized how much you were worth. Why wait decades for an inheritance, she'd say, when we can start our real life now? And you agreed just like that. He shrugged. Not right away, but she convinced me it would be better for everyone. You were already old. Eventually you'd start having health problems. You'd suffer. It would be a favor, really. The coldness with which he spoke made my blood run cold. This was not the son I knew or thought I knew. A favor, I repeated slowly. Poisoning your own parents would be a favor. It wouldn't be painful, he replied, as if that mattered. You would just go to sleep and not wake up, no suffering, like the wine I prepared today. Daniel was silent for a moment. How did you find out? It was the messages on Sarah's phone, wasn't it? That idiot technician? Yes, it was the messages, but even without them, we would have figured it out eventually. You weren't as smart as you thought, son. He shifted in his chair, the handcuffs clinking. So now what are you going to testify against your own son? Send me to prison. You were going to make it look like an accident. No one would suffer, you'd die peacefully, and I would finally have the life I deserve. The life you deserve, I repeated, letting the words hang in the air between us. I looked at him, really looked at him, trying to see past the anger, past the coldness, searching for any trace of the boy we raised. I found nothing. I don't recognize you, I said finally, my voice barely a whisper. The son we raised, that we loved, that we protected. Where is he? I'm right here, Daniel replied, a flash of emotion crossing his face. It's me. I just grew up. I just got tired of waiting for my turn. I stood up slowly. You'll have a good lawyer. We'll pay for that. It's the last thing we'll do as your parents. But don't expect anything else from us, Daniel. What you did, there's no coming back from it. Mom, he called out as I reached the door. You don't understand. I just wanted a chance to really live. I turned one last time. We gave you every chance, son. Education, love, support. The choice of how to live was yours, and you chose this. I left the room feeling as if every step required enormous effort. In the hallway, I found Richard waiting, his eyes red, his face marked by tears he didn't try to hide. What did he say? He asked quietly. The truth, finally, I replied. He did it all for money. Our deaths were just a means for him to have the life he deserves. Richard closed his eyes, a deep pain contorting his face. How did we not see it? How did we not see what he became? I had no answer. The same question haunted me. How could parents who were present for every important moment, who celebrated every achievement, who taught values and principles, how could they raise someone capable of coldly planning their own parents' murder? We left the station in silence, heading to the hotel where we would spend the next few nights. On the way, Richard stayed little lost in his own thoughts. I knew he was replaying every moment of Daniel's upbringing, searching for the exact point where something went wrong. At the hotel, a simple but comfortable place downtown, we asked for a room with 2 single beds. Neither of us mentioned it, but we both knew we needed our own space that night. The pain was too personal, too deep to be shared even after so many years together. I lay down exhausted, but sleep wouldn't come. Images of Daniel as a child, mixed with the vision of him putting poison in the wine, creating a waking nightmare I couldn't escape. When I finally fell asleep, it was a restless sleep, filled with confusing dreams, where I ran down endless hallways, chased by shadows with my son's face. I woke with a start to the sound of the cell phone. It was Commissioner Miller. Mrs. Anderson, sorry to call so early. We need you to come to the station as soon as possible. There's been a development in the case. The grave tone in his voice alarmed me. Did something happen? I'd rather explain in person. It's best if you come as soon as you can. I woke Richard and told him about the call. Within 30 minutes, we were at the station being led directly to the commissioner's office. Miller greeted us with a grim expression. Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, thank you for coming so quickly. I have complicated news. "What happened?" Richard asked, his voice thick. "Sarah Anderson requested to make a full statement in exchange for a reduced sentence. She's willing to testify against your son." I felt a knot in my throat. "What did she say?" "According to her, the original plan was just to steal from you. Siphon money from your accounts, get power of attorney to control your assets. The idea to physically eliminate you only came up in the last few months when Daniel realized you might discover the diversions." Richard squeezed my hand tightly. "She also claims," the commissioner continued, "that Daniel was also planning to kill her after you were dead, and he had access to all the money." The revelation landed like a bomb. "My son was planning to kill his own wife," I whispered. "According to her, yes. She found messages between him and another woman discussing how they would split the money after the Sarah problem was solved." I closed my eyes, trying to absorb this new layer of horror. It wasn't enough to plan our deaths. Daniel was willing to eliminate anyone who stood between him and the money. "There's more," Miller said, his tone even graver. "We analyzed the powder he put in the wine. It's a mix of potent sedatives and a substance called oleander. Extremely toxic, causes cardiac arrest. And we found evidence that he had tried before." "What do you mean?" Richard asked. "Samples of your hair, Mrs. Anderson, revealed traces of the same substance, likely administered in small doses to simulate natural health problems. That would explain the memory lapses he claimed you were having. They weren't lapses. They were symptoms of gradual poisoning." The room seemed to spin around me. I grabbed the edge of the table to steady myself as the cruel reality hit me. My son had already started poisoning me, slowly, methodically. "For how long?" I managed to ask. "It's hard to say precisely, but based on the samples, at least 3 months." 3 months. I mentally reviewed the small signs I had ignored: more frequent headaches, moments of dizziness, sleepless nights. I attributed it all to stress, to age, never imagining I was being slowly poisoned by my own son. "And Mr. Anderson?" the commissioner asked, turning to my husband. "I feel fine," he replied, confused. "Even so, we recommend toxicological exams. If your wife was a target, it's possible he had started acting against you as well." We left the station even more shaken than before. The idea that Daniel not only planned to kill us, but had already begun the process was unbearable. Every meal we shared in the last few months, every cup of coffee he kindly prepared, every medication he reminded me to take. It all could have been part of his macabre plan. "We're going to the hospital right now," Richard insisted. "We need to check for permanent damage." At the hospital, we were treated with priority after explaining the situation. The doctors ran a battery of tests, collected blood and hair samples, and admitted us for 24-hour observation. The results, when they came, confirmed the suspicions. I had detectable levels of oleander in my system, though not enough to cause permanent damage. Richard was clean, suggesting Daniel had focused on me first. Probably because, as an older woman with a history of health problems, I had breast cancer years ago, my death would seem less suspicious. "You were lucky, ma'am," the doctor explained. "The gradual poisoning was interrupted before it caused irreversible damage. With the right treatment and time, your body will completely eliminate the toxin." Lucky. It was a strange word to describe the situation. Was I lucky because I found out my son was poisoning me before he succeeded in killing me? In the following days, the case grew to proportions we never imagined. The story of the son who planned to murder his parents for the inheritance attracted national media attention. Reporters surrounded the hotel where we were staying. They called constantly. They tried every way to get a statement from us. We refused all interviews, all appearances. Our pain was too deep, too personal to be turned into a public spectacle. Lucy Mendez, our lawyer, became our official spokesperson, managing all legal aspects and keeping the press at bay. It was she who brought us the news that Daniel would be charged with attempted first-degree murder, with aggravating factors of premeditated poisoning and vile motive. If convicted, he would face decades in prison. A week after Daniel and Sarah's arrest, we finally felt safe enough to return home. The police had removed all the surveillance equipment, but installed an alarm system connected directly to the station. "Just in case," as Commissioner Miller said. Walking back into that house was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Every room held memories, some beautiful, others now contaminated by the knowledge of what Daniel had become. In the living room, the family photos seemed to mock us. Daniel as a child smiling on his first day of school. Daniel as a teenager proud with his swimming trophy. Daniel as an adult at his wedding to Sarah. Moments that captured a life we now knew had been at least in part an illusion. Richard walked slowly through the house, touching objects, looking at photographs as if trying to reconcile the happy past with the devastating present. "We need to move," he said finally. "I can't live here knowing what happened in this kitchen, in this house." I agreed in silence. The house that had been our refuge for decades was now saturated with betrayal and danger. That night, lying in our bed holding hands in the dark, Richard voiced the thought that had been tormenting me. Will we ever understand what happened? How our son turned into this? I don't know. I answered honestly. Maybe some things don't have an explanation. Maybe some people just choose the wrong path regardless of how they were raised. We talked to him, Emily, so many times. About honesty, about hard work, about family. How was that not enough? Maybe for some people nothing is ever enough. Maybe the emptiness inside them can never be filled. We lay in silence for a long time, each lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Richard spoke again. What do we do now? How do we move on from this? It was the question I had been asking myself. How do you rebuild a life when the very foundations have been destroyed? How do you trust again when the betrayal came from the one you loved most? One day at a time, I replied, squeezing his hand. We start over somewhere else, leaning on each other. In the following weeks, we put the house up for sale, started the process of finding a new home, and tried to rebuild some sense of normalcy. We found a small apartment downtown completely different from the spacious house where we raised Daniel, and we slowly began to transfer only the items that didn't bring painful memories. Meanwhile, the court case moved forward. Sarah reached a deal with the prosecution, agreeing to testify against Daniel in exchange for a reduced sentence. Daniel, on the other hand, remained firm in denying the most serious accusations, claiming it was all just a family misunderstanding and the evidence had been manipulated. 2 months after his arrest, we received a letter from him from prison. Richard wanted to burn it without reading, but something in me needed to know what he had to say. The letter was short, written in the familiar handwriting I would recognize anywhere. Mom and Dad, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need to say this. Everything I did out of love. Yes, I wanted the money, I wanted the freedom, but I also wanted to spare you the suffering of getting old, of becoming dependent, of losing your dignity. I don't expect forgiveness. I know what I did is unforgivable in your eyes, but I want you to know it wasn't out of hatred. It was out of ambition. Yes, greed perhaps, but also a distorted kind of love. One day when you're ready, I'd like to see you again. Until then, know that despite everything, I am still your son, Daniel. I read the letter 3 times, trying to find sincerity in the words, some trace of the son I knew. But all I saw was more manipulation, more attempts to justify the unjustifiable. Out of love, I murmured, folding the letter. He tried to kill us out of love. Richard, who finally decided to read it too, shook his head sadly. He still doesn't get it. Maybe he never will. I put the letter in a drawer and never replied. Maybe one day, when the pain wasn't so sharp, when I could think of Daniel without feeling that devastating mix of love and betrayal, I would find the words to respond. But not now. Not while the wound was still bleeding. The following months passed in a blur of legal procedures, therapy sessions, and the arduous task of rebuilding our lives. We sold the house for less than it was worth. We just wanted to get rid of it. And settled into the apartment downtown. It was smaller, simpler, but it didn't carry the weight of painful memories. Daniel's trial was scheduled to begin in 3 months. The prosecution had a solid case with abundant evidence. The text messages, the videos from the house, the toxicology reports confirming the gradual poisoning, Sarah's testimony, the forged documents. A conviction seemed certain. Still, the thought of testifying against my own son terrified me. How would I sit in that courtroom and tell the world how he had methodically planned our deaths? How would I look him in the eye as I sealed his fate? Richard and I discussed this at length with our therapist, Dr. Marta, whom we started seeing weekly after the tragedy. "You are not responsible for his choices," she constantly reminded us. "Testifying is not a betrayal, it is simply telling the truth." "But he's our son," Richard argued. "Despite everything, he's still our son." "Yes, he is your son. And he is also a grown man who made terrible decisions. Both realities can coexist." One afternoon, while organizing some boxes we still hadn't unpacked in the new apartment, I found an old photo album. I sat on the floor and slowly began to flip through it. There were pictures of Daniel as a baby, then as a child, as a teenager, always smiling, always surrounded by our love. In one specific photo, he was about 5 years old, proudly holding up a drawing he had made. 3 stick figures representing our family, with a smiling sun overhead. "To the best mom in the world," the drawing said in crooked, childish letters. The tears came uncontrollably. Where was that little boy now? At what point did that loving creature transform into someone capable of planning his own parents' deaths? Richard found me like that, crying over the open album. Without a word, he sat down next to me and held me. We just stayed there, both crying for the loss of the son we loved, not for his physical death, but for the death of who we thought he was. The following week, we received an unexpected visit. Stella, my friend from the library who had helped me document the evidence against Daniel, brought a folder with old newspaper clippings. "Emily, Richard," she began excitedly, "I found something you need to see." The clippings were from a small newspaper in a southern town dated 5 years back. The headline screamed, "Elderly man dies in mysterious circumstances. Niece inherits fortune after uncle's death. Police investigate suspicious death but close case due to lack of evidence." "What is this?" I asked, confused. "Look at the photo." Stella pointed to the image of a young woman being interviewed. It was Sarah, a few years younger, but unmistakably her. Before she called herself Sarah Silva and moved to Chicago, she was known as Caroline Santos in this small town. And the man who died mysteriously was her uncle who raised her after her parents died. Richard took the clippings, reading quickly. She inherited everything. The police suspected poisoning, but couldn't get conclusive proof. "Exactly," Stella confirmed. "And do you know what the suspected substance was?" "Oleander," I replied, a chill running down my spine. Stella nodded grimly. "The same poison they found in your system, Emily. The same one Daniel put in the wine." The implication was clear and devastating. Sarah wasn't just Daniel's accomplice. She was likely the mastermind, the person who brought the idea, who taught the technique, who had done this before. "Why are you showing us this now?" Richard asked. "Because her plea deal with the prosecution is almost finalized," Stella explained. "She's going to spend just a few years in prison in exchange for her testimony against Daniel." "That's not fair. Not when she's probably already killed before." We took the discovery to Lucy Mendez, our lawyer, who immediately contacted the case prosecutor. The investigations were reopened, both into the death of Sarah's uncle and into other possible similar cases in her past. Within weeks, Sarah's plea deal was on hold, and she was facing additional charges. The police found a journal in her apartment detailing not only the plan to kill us, but also notes about her uncle's death and plans to eliminate Daniel after gaining access to our money. The picture that emerged was even darker than we had imagined. Sarah was a calculating sociopath who had deceived Daniel, manipulating him into planning our deaths. She had used him as a tool, intending to dispose of him as soon as she got what she wanted. Daniel, upon learning this during a preliminary hearing, collapsed. According to his lawyer, he finally realized the extent of the manipulation he had suffered, although this didn't absolve him of his guilt for actively participating in the plan. It was in that moment that we made a difficult decision. We would visit Daniel in prison, not for forgiveness or reconciliation. It was too soon for that, if it would ever be possible, but to face the truth, to try to understand. The penitentiary was a cold, oppressive place. We followed a guard down gray hallways to a small visiting room where we waited in tense silence. When the door opened and Daniel entered, handcuffed and wearing the orange prisoner's uniform, My heart sank. He had lost weight. His face was pale with deep dark circles. He looked much older than his 35 years. When he saw us walk in, tears immediately started streaming down his face. "Mom, Dad," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "We came." Richard replied simply, sitting at the table. There wasn't much to say. The chasm between us was too vast to be filled with words. But being there, offering that small human comfort, seemed important. Not just for Daniel, but for us too. "I'm so sorry," he said finally. "For everything. I know it doesn't mean anything after what I did, but I have to say it." "Why?" I asked directly. He looked at his hands. "Because I finally understood the magnitude of what I did. Not just the plan, the lies, the manipulation, but how much I hurt you, how much I destroyed. And I realized I could never fix it." For the first time since this all began, I saw something in his eyes that seemed genuine. Not manipulation, not self-pity, but a real understanding of the pain he had caused. "You're right," Richard said, his voice gentle but firm. "Some things can't be fixed, but that doesn't mean you should give up." "Why, what do I have left?" "Life," I replied simply. "Imperfect, difficult within these walls for many years, but still life. The chance to maybe one day do something good with it." We were only there for half an hour. We didn't promise to come back regularly, nor did we offer easy forgiveness. We just said goodbye, leaving the possibility, however faint, of some kind of future relationship in the air. On the way home, Richard and I were silent for a long time, processing the visit, the conflicting emotions it stirred. "Was it the right thing to do?" he finally asked. "I don't know if there is a right thing in situations like this," I replied. "I just know I don't regret going." 4 years after discovering the conspiracy against our lives, Richard and I celebrated 45 years of marriage. We decided not to do anything big, just a quiet dinner at home with the few friends who stood by us through the storm. During dinner, as I watched Richard tell a story that made everyone laugh, I realized something important. We were happy again, not in the same way as before. There were scars that would never fully disappear, but in a deeper, more conscious way. We had faced the worst life could throw at us, and we had survived. We had rebuilt something from the chaos, found meaning after the destruction. And perhaps most importantly, we had chosen not to let the betrayal poison the rest of our lives. Daniel was still in prison, where he would spend many more years. After his breakdown, he seemed to have found some kind of purpose. He started studying law through a prisoner program with the idea of eventually helping other inmates. We visited him occasionally, not frequently, but enough to maintain a tenuous connection. Sarah was serving her sentence in a maximum security prison, refusing any contact with us. From what we heard, she continued to deny responsibility for all her crimes, always blaming others. As for us, we learned to carry our story without letting it completely define us. When we met new people, eventually the truth would come out. Our city wasn't that big and the case had been notorious. But we discovered that most people were compassionate, respectful of our pain. Some nights I still wake up with a start, remembering that moment in the electronics shop when Dave turned the phone screen towards me and my world fell apart. Sometimes Richard still has nightmares where Daniel manages to complete his plan. But those shadows from the past appear less frequently now, overcome by the light of the present. The small joys of everyday life, new friends, rediscovered hobbies, the love that survived the unthinkable. On the night of our 45th anniversary, after all the guests had left, Richard and I sat on our apartment balcony, looking at the starry sky. "Who would have thought," he commented, holding my hand, "that after everything we'd still be here, together." "Survivors," I smiled, squeezing his hand. "More than that," Richard corrected. "We're living." And he was right. We weren't just surviving, we were living, fully, consciously, gratefully. We had learned the hard way that life is fragile, that the most intimate relationships can hide terrible secrets, that betrayal can come from where you least expect it. But we also learned that human strength is extraordinary, that it's possible to start over even after the worst devastation, that love, true love, not the distorted version Daniel claimed to feel, can survive even the worst storms. 5 years after that fateful afternoon in the electronics shop, I look back and see not only the tragedy, but also the growth that came after. I didn't choose this path. I didn't ask for this pain. But I accepted the challenge to rebuild, to find meaning, to keep loving despite everything. And maybe that's the greatest victory, not allowing hatred, bitterness, or fear to define the rest of my life, choosing everyday compassion, courage, and hope, even knowing how dark the world can be. Dave, without knowing it, gave me more than just the chance to physically survive that afternoon. He gave me the chance to discover a strength I never knew I had. The strength not only to unravel a conspiracy, but to rebuild a life from scratch, to love again, to trust, despite the scars. And for that, I will be eternally grateful. Now, if you liked this story, click subscribe and tell me in the comments what part left your jaw on the floor. Oh, and don't forget to become a member for access to exclusive videos. I don't post here. I'll see you there.